Now, Milkah, on today's show, we're going to be doing something. I don't know if I think you know that you're familiar with barbecue sauce? Somehow. Yeah. So now we're going to be making our own barbecue sauce from scratch. For most of the viewers watching at home, most of them may have already pretty much gotten used to picking it from the shelf in the ketchup and tomato sauce section. But we're now going to show them how it is done from scratch. Yeah. All right, are you feeling like you're energetic for this recipe for today?
I'm very prepared.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now, of course, very importantly, before I begin, very important also to inform you and give you an idea of what I'll be working with. So I'm going to introduce the ingredients from the very front, beginning with the green olives. You're going to need a few pieces, maybe 4 or 5. You're also going to need a few cloves of garlic, some minced ginger, and a tablespoon of tomato paste. You're also going to require 1 whole egg, some cinnamon sticks, some cumin seeds, and some black peppercorns. You're also going to require some garam masala and 1 stock cube. You will require also about 80 grams of some minced beef, about 1 tablespoon of some Worcestershire sauce. You'll also require some red wine vinegar and about a teaspoon of some Tabasco sauce. You will also require 1 medium-sized onion to make your sauce with, and of course another 1 medium-sized onion finely chopped, which we'll be using for the meatballs. You're also going to require some sugar, some breadcrumbs to combine all the ingredients together. You'll also require about 3 medium-sized tomatoes and 1 whole imported lemon, some salt and black peppercorns, which we'll be using for seasoning. You're also going to require some coriander, so I'll pretty much split them into 2, one that we'll be using for the sauce and one that we're going to be incorporating into the meatballs. And last but not least, you will also require about 1 cup of some diced pineapples. The riper the better, and this is basically going to aid us in making that very beautiful and succulent barbecue sauce. But before I continue, a small break to give you a chance to sit back, relax and unwind, and we'll see you after a short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, we're right about ready to start our very simple dish for the day, which is of course some homemade meatballs, of course incorporated or served with a little bit of some homemade barbecue sauce as well. Now, before I begin, I will of course ask Milkah to turn on the heat for us. And as she does so, we're going to pretty much go over some of the ingredients that are on our countertop. So our ingredients are basically divided into 2. We of course have some ingredients that we will be incorporating and making our barbecue sauce with, and there's also ingredients that we're going to be working on we're going to be using to make our meatball mixture. So we're going to start off very simply by starting off the barbecue sauce. This of course will take a little longer to cook, which of course always makes it easier, especially when you're trying to combine 2 different ingredients that are basically to pair into one dish. Always advisable to start with the one that's got the most labor, and then of course work your way towards making it easier towards the end. So Milkah, we're going to start off very simply. We're going to start our barbecue sauce. Now for that, I'm going to just coarsely chop some of my white onion. So I'm just going to leave them in big chunks. And the reason for this is basically I only want the juice of the onion. So what happens is when we cut them into big chunks, we manage to actually extract only the juices, and we can easily remove this and throw them afterwards. So this is on already, so you can turn it up a little higher, maybe about there. Yes, of course, then very, very simply, always begin by adding a bit of oil. I'm going to be using a bit of some olive oil for this recipe. So add about 2 tablespoons in there. Remember, you are going to be frying up quite a bit of ingredients. And of course, next up, we'll begin by adding our onions.
Can I use the normal oil?
Yes, you can use regular oil, and you can also use red onion if you can't be able to find the white onion. You can also use leeks if you can find them, or spring onions. I think you've seen them, green at the top, the long ones. Also a very good addition for barbecue sauce. So basically we start off the process very simply by allowing our onions to sweat out. And as they continue, I'm also going to be incorporating about 2 sticks of cinnamon. So these are just whole cinnamon sticks. And I also have some black peppercorns, the black ones, and then the brown ones are coriander seeds. So just going to add those in there. Yeah, you can start stirring. And as she continues, we'll also continue to add the rest of the ingredients, beginning with my ginger, minced ginger of course. I'm also going to add to that 1 stock cube. So for this you can actually proceed to use beef stock cubes or chicken stock cubes. It doesn't really make a difference. And basically what you need to do at this stage is basically to continue to fry the mixture right up until your onions are very, very brown. Remember, the idea is to basically get the flavors out. So for this particular beginning part, you will of course continue to cook right up until your onions are completely well cooked, and they're pretty much also going to separate into different sizes. And of course, as she proceeds, I'm also going to be adding some chunks of tomato. So Milkah, I would love to ask, have you in any particular time or stages of cooking, have you ever thought of making your own sauces from home?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So then this is a very, very simple base that we are starting with today. And of course, towards the end of the show, I'm also going to mention some good tips that people can use at home to maybe use the same technique to build on their sauces. Right, so once your tomatoes are chopped up into chunks, proceed to add those to your pan. Right, so as I mentioned, very, very simple technique of making your own barbecue sauce. One particular key ingredient that I have to mention as well, the pineapple. Remember, this is what gives the barbecue its beautiful characteristic. And one beautiful thing as well is from the juices that we can extract from the cooked pineapple. It will of course continue to combine with sugars as well as a ketchup, building a very, very beautiful and all-round flavor. So for those of you who are thinking of making your own sauces from home, you can of course incorporate some of the key ingredients, especially citric fruits such as pineapples, lemons, or even oranges. They always bring a nice, beautiful mouthful, especially when you're done combining your sauce and finishing it off right at the end. Right, so to that we'll add our pineapple. So for this I'm using very, very ripe pineapples, just to mention. One particular thing you will realize, if you're using semi-ripe pineapples, they may actually not contain the right consistency of sweetness and in the juices. So also to mention, for those of you at home who are looking at making your own homemade sauces, remember there are endless amounts of recipes out there. I particularly love to make my sauces from scratch, so if you do have the time available to you, always take the time to do so. That way you will actually own the recipe, and as well you will actually not have the basic flavor of commercial sauces that are already available to us in the retail stores out there. So now our mixture is now nicely cooking away. We'll just raise the temperature just a little bit. So as you can see, Milkah, you can see the juices are starting to drop out from everything at the bottom, and that's basically what will give our barbecue sauce the flavor we are looking for. So to that we are going to add about 3 tablespoons of sugar. Remember, one particular characteristic of a good barbecue sauce, it really, really has to have that sharp kick of sugar. To that, I'm also going to add my garam masala. And I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. And this is also basically going to give an all-round combination of flavors. It will also blend in the flavors in the pan very, very well, giving us a nice, beautiful mouthfeel. And of course, to that, we'll also add our ketchup. So I'm using regular bottled ketchup from the supermarket. Remember, one particular beautiful thing about some of the ingredients and sauces we make on the show, you can of course incorporate ready items with fresh ingredients to actually give it a nice, beautiful experience all round. Right, so basically now if you can be able to see it from the cameras, it's actually nicely colored. You can actually be able to see the nice vibrant color from the barbecue sauce. But of course, to give it that very, very dark tint of color, remember barbecue sauce is characteristically a little darker than ketchup. So for this reason, we're going to be adding some dark soy sauce. So once we add that, you'll notice the color will be a little darker. And of course, also to lift that beautiful sharpness, we're also going to be adding about 3 tablespoons of some red wine vinegar. Last but not least, 1 teaspoon of some Tabasco sauce. This is basically going to give you that nice, beautiful kick of heat. Remember, one beautiful thing about Tabasco sauce, very, very good extract from peppers. It's a very, very good and mild flavored chili, and it also carries a very, very beautiful abundance in flavor. So as you can be able to see, the color is now nicely almost coloring darker.
Yeah.
But of course, I will remind you, we'll be tasting one barbecue sauce that I already have that's store-bought. And we'll also test it alongside with the one we're making today. So you'll be the judge of the sauce for today, yeah? Perfect. Right, so as that continues to cook, very importantly, always take this time now to begin to work on your meatballs. So for that, I'm going to grab one big bowl. To that, I'll begin by adding my mince. I'll also add my white chopped onions. Right, we're also going to be incorporating some garlic. I'm of course not going to be using a garlic crusher for this particular recipe. I will of course proceed to mince that. But because of the fact that it makes it much easier for you to mince your garlic, I always like to add a bit of salt. So what salt does is it makes it much easier to grind the garlic, in that the salt will actually make it very easy for the garlic to mince.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So this is a very, very handy tip I can share with you today. And then also something important to mention, Milkah, if you're going to be adding some salt when you're grinding garlic, always remember not to add salt there first. Always begin by adding this and then proceed to add everything else. So begin by pounding down your garlic. Simple as that. And basically once your garlic is pounded down, proceed to work your pestle around your mortar. And what this does is it actually creates a grinding effect due to the fact that there's a bit of some coarse salt in there. This will of course make it much easier for you to get your garlic to mince up very, very quickly. Very importantly, always clean your stick as well. So have you been able to work on with such tools in the kitchen at home before?
Yeah.
So you're very familiar with this.
Yeah.
So you do know it actually is one of the most important ingredients or kitchen equipment in an Asian kitchen. One beautiful thing about your pestle and mortar, you can be able to grind spices in it. You can be able to mince ingredients in it. You can actually be able to also mince some raw ingredients such as fruits. And it will of course make it much easier for you to create a puree that can actually be able to separate your pulp from the fruit juice itself. Now just what?
Should I continue?
Now as that cooks away, yes, but we are going to be adding a bit of water to that. So I'm going to add a whole cup of water in there. And now basically what the water does, it's got 2 particular characteristics. It's going to aid in making sure that we can of course combine most of the ingredients and the flavors in the pan. and it also allows us for us to cool down the pan a little bit, making it of course easier for the ingredients to cook without overcooking. And while that continues, I'm also going to finish up this mixture on the side. So always be sure to clean your pestle before proceeding to discard it into your sink. Remember, there's so much garlic around this particular stick as well. So away we go. And I'll just begin by just scooping out all of the garlic. And this we're going to be adding to the meatballs. So that should give you about 7 to 8 pieces of cloves, should give you at least 1 heaped teaspoon of minced garlic. Very, very handy ingredient. Right, and once that's done, proceed to crack in your egg. I'm just going to crack 1 whole egg into our mixture. Then, of course, very importantly, always remember to season. So I'm also going to season that very, very slightly with a bit of salt. Remember, a lot of the salt that we use to grind the garlic will, of course, be absorbed very, very quickly due to the juices in the garlic. But a little bit of an addition will, of course, carry forward into flavoring your dish much further. And we're going to crush in some black peppercorns. And then I'll also proceed to chop up my fresh coriander leaves. So with coriander for this particular recipe, I'm going to be using quite a bit of coriander, as you can see. The idea behind this is to have a nice rich meatball that's actually got some herby flavors to it. So as we did for the previous show, we had a spicy meatball. Now this one's going to be a herby kind of a meatball. It's going to have more herbs than the spices that we had in the previous episode. So this is actually a very, very good particular one that you can also make if you're making for your kids at home. You can actually be able to combine the same recipe, and they can also be able to enjoy it without the effect of the heat. Right, so very simply proceed to chop that very coarsely. So this I'm going to chop it very, very roughly. Of course, because of the fact that we do want to see the coriander sticking out from the meatballs. And of course, as the barbecue sauce continues to cook, very important that I mention, this is a particularly difficult sauce to make in a very short span of time. So one particular tip I would share with all of you out there, and with you, Milva, as well. When you make a sauce such as this, if you make it 1 day in advance, it will actually taste better than if you did it on the same day. So it's actually one of the best sauces to make maybe a day before you'll use it. Allow it to sit in the fridge. When you take it out in the morning, it will have a more concentrated flavor. Right, so in goes our coriander. And we're of course also going to be adding some coriander leaves to the barbecue sauce. So I'm just going to chop that very, very coarsely. This should actually be nice big sizes. And we're just going to add that in there. So you can give that a quick mix. Right, so once some of these ingredients are in there, very, very simply, we will proceed now to give that a quick mix. But very importantly, we'll also be incorporating a bit of some breadcrumbs. Remember, this gives a binding effect to our meatballs. And I'm also going to chop up some olives. This is, of course, to give it a very, very diverse flavor. And being that olives are also packed with a very, very good touch of flavor, you will actually be able to enjoy this. Now, because I know you haven't tried an olive before, I'm actually going to allow you to taste one on the show today. Okay. And you'll let us know what you think. Exactly. So all the flavors that you're tasting is basically the flavor that it will carry into the meatballs. So especially on days that you're thinking of going, maybe making cuisine or food that is maybe authentic, or you're trying to reflect a different nationality style of eating, this particular recipe almost comes close to the Greek style of making meatballs, where they incorporate a bit of olives to their meatball mixture. Yeah. So with that, we're going to chop that very, very finely. Remember, since you're making meatballs, very important that your ingredients are almost the same size. Now, something also I wanted to share with the viewers, Milva, maybe you can share with the viewers how you managed to be part of the show today. Maybe for some of them, for some of those who are watching, maybe there's viewers out there who are very eager to be in your position right now. Maybe you can share with them how easy it is to join us on the show at BrandPlus.
It's very, 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 very easy. Just text the number below there. It's free of charge. Just ask them to be your guest and pop, you'll be just where I am.
Easy as that, yeah?
Easy as that.
So for those of you out there who are also looking forward to join us on the show, remember we're always more than happy to allow or give a chance to some of you who are very, very keen on the show. And remember as well, for those of you who are also eager to learn something new, or maybe you want a recipe to be aired that you're very, very eager to learn and you may not be able to make it onto the set, you can also be able to text the toll-free number and you may just be able to see your dish being prepared on this very, very set on the next episode of Dinner Guide. So once we're done with this mixture, I'm just going to begin to mix that by hand. So it's very, very simple and easy. As I said, also no chilies in this particular mixture. Very, very settled flavor. And then also if you don't have any of the olives, you can work without them. It won't make a difference to your recipe. Right, so as you combine your ingredients in your bowl, very important to mash them together with your fingers. And of course give it a nice firm squeeze by hand. Remember, by working your mixture this way, you actually encourage for the ingredients to really combine a little faster. And of course, after mixing for about a minute to a minute and a half, you should be able to actually have a nice consistent mixture that can hold. And that of course gives you the leeway to proceed to form those into meatballs. But because we are going to be baking this in the oven, I'm going to add just a little bit more breadcrumbs. One beautiful thing about this, it's actually going to absorb the juices, and it will of course avoid the meatballs from collapsing once they go into the oven. So I'm just going to mix that through once more. Always, of course, cleaning the sides of your bowl with your mixture. It's actually a very nice way to make sure you don't lose out on any ingredients in your bowl. And of course, as I mentioned, at the end stage of mixing all this, you should actually be able to have a nice clean bowl. Yeah? So this is one beautiful checkup when you're making meatballs. Always be sure that it can actually hold itself nice and tight. Because if you try and lift it and it falls apart, it means even when you put it in the oven or if you put it in the oil, it's just going to separate. So these are very, very good checkpoint. And of course, once that's done, I'm going to clean my hands very briefly. And we'll of course begin by giving our barbecue sauce a quick check. And now we can now reduce the temperature completely to the lowest. So turn it much further to the further. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, all the way to the end. And now if you can be able to see that from the cameras, it's got a nice, beautiful consistency and thickness. We'll of course turn this off completely at this stage. We'll allow it to cool off very, very slightly. And then we're going to proceed to sieve it. And then we're going to take the liquid that's left over. And then we're going to check for our barbecue sauce at the end. But before we get there, very important that we get our meatballs in the oven. So I will of course call upon you once more to do us the favor of shaping our meatballs. Right, so you can jump over this side. Right, so very, very importantly, as I mentioned, we are going to be baking our meatballs as opposed to frying them, which we've done in our previous episode. So very important to mention, at this stage, make sure to begin to preheat your oven. I'm going to set it for about between 180 to 200 degrees. We're going to give that just a few minutes to give us just enough time to get our meatballs from the mixing bowl onto our baking dish of choice. And we're going to proceed to bake this in the oven, but I will of course share the details with you as we proceed. Right, so here you go. So we're going to make it a little more interesting this time. So you're going to scoop and I'm going to roll. And while she does so, you can set them here. While she does so, also very, very important to make sure that your dish is always lined. A very, very particular simple technique you can use is by drizzling a bit of oil on the base. This will of course aid in making sure that your meatballs don't stick to the dish. So I'm just going to drop about a teaspoon of some olive oil in there. And using a food brush, I'm going to work the oil right around the sides and also on the base of the dish. And once you're done lining your dish, it should be nice and covered on the sides as well as on the base. Remember, one particular mistake many of us always forget: whenever you're putting any particular dishes on a casserole dish, especially such as meatballs, on occasion some of them may tend to stick to the base, especially as they continue to cook and dry off at the end. So by creating that bit of a cushion between the casserole dish and the meatball, that oil will also aid in making sure to give a nice beautiful golden color underneath, and it will of course make it easier to remove. Right, so as Milkah continues to finish off the mixture, I'm going to grab the meatballs one piece at a time. And as I mentioned, very, very simple technique of constituting your meatballs. Always begin by giving them a nice firm press, and you can proceed to do so for anywhere between 20 to 30 seconds. And remember, this is always going to aid in getting any air pockets out of your mixture completely. Milkah, how's it going so far?
Good.
Now you see it's actually easier since you practiced, yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. Right, so just to finish this off, I'm going to roll them on the palm of my hands once more. Of course, always making sure to get always to try and get the ball as symmetric as possible. And this should of course not be too big. If I can be able to compare to the size of a lemon, you can of course be able to see that from the cameras. Also to mention, whenever you have a very, very big meatball, remember, a meatball should be sizable enough to be able to bite onto. So always make sure that it's actually not too big and it's also not too small, otherwise it may not actually resemble what you're pretty much looking for. Right, so in goes our meatballs. And of course, by this stage, our oven should be nice and hot. Of course, anytime you're preheating your oven, it should actually take you anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes to get it up to par. Of course, if you are using a convectional oven, but if you're of course using a very, very old make kind of oven, you can also pretty much maybe grab a small cup of water and you can pour just a little bit of water at the base. If it forms steam, then you know it's hot enough. So for some of you who may of course not have ovens such as this with timers, on occasion I have actually worked with ovens that did not have a timer or even a calibrator for temperature. One beautiful checkpoint as well is just pour some water at the base of the oven. As soon as the steam pops up, then you know it's actually ready for you. Right, so just to finish off the meatballs, very importantly, and something also I could mention, you can of course also drizzle some oil over each meatball, especially if you're going to be baking them for a long period. They do actually tend to dry up very, very quickly. But for the reason that we are going to be tossing ours in some barbecue sauce once they're done, I'm proceeding to cook them without any oil on the top. And this will of course allow for them to really absorb the barbecue sauce once we get to the last and final part of plating. Also something very important to mention, I can drop that in there. Also something very important to mention, always give a bit of allowance of space between each piece. This is basically just to allow the temperature to move in nice and easily. And of course, if they're also going to expand in any particular way, it will of course allow for space so that they don't actually touch and proceed to fall apart. So we're going to throw that in the oven. And we're going to set our temperature to about 190 degrees. I'm also going to calibrate my timer to about 20 minutes. I will of course proceed to check after the 10th or the 15th minute just to make sure they're cooked through. And of course, one particular checkpoint is to make sure that they're almost beautifully golden brown in color, if not perfectly golden brown. And then we will of course come back to the last and final part, which is finishing off our barbecue sauce. So I think, Milkah, we can take a break now and we can allow our meatballs to cook, yeah? Perfect. So do not touch that dial. We'll see you in a little bit. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in and you missed out on this whole episode, remember you can always be able to recap through our YouTube channel. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. There you should be able to find many other different recipes that you can be able to work on or try in your very own home kitchen. But for now, we pretty much come to the last bit of the show. So we're going to begin by straining our sauce. So Milkah, very, very simple. Once the mixture is cooked and nice and thick, we're just going to pour it into a separate bowl. And basically what you need to do now is, by using this spoon, just proceed to work the mixture right up until all the barbecue sauce is out. And while she does so, I'm also going to take out the meatballs that we threw in a little earlier. And as you can be able to see, they've got a nice, beautiful golden color at the top. The texture, or rather the consistency, has managed to hold very nicely. They didn't actually pop in the oven, which is basically what we were looking for. Now, we're going to very simply proceed to plate this. So I'm just going to move them onto the plate. Simple as that. And of course, once done, very important, before you proceed to serve any particular meat, you should always be able to check and make sure that it's fully done. So I'm just going to slice that into half. And as you can be able to see, nice and clean on the inside. You can actually be able to see there is no red on the inside, which is of course a sure sign that it's fully cooked. And now, to finish that off, we're going to very, very simply proceed to first discard the vegetables and pineapple that we cooked off a little earlier. So those you can of course proceed to discard. Remember, you have of course cooked out all the nutrient out of it. So at this stage, you're not going to use any of it at all. So you can proceed to discard that. And of course, once your barbecue sauce is done, you can of course always allow it to cool off, bottle it. And this can simply stay in your refrigerator for up to 2 weeks. You can of course also freeze it, and it will last a little longer. Now, of course, to finish that off, of course, you can never serve meatballs completely dry. Proceed to just drizzle some barbecue sauce right over the top. Simple, huh?
Yeah, okay.
And now, of course, the test point that we've been waiting for since the beginning of the show. Remember, we had a bet that we'd actually try out my barbecue sauce versus a store-bought one and see the difference. So this is a store-bought barbecue sauce. Now, of course, as I mentioned, Milkah, this is the barbecue sauce that is store-bought, and this is the one that we made. You can see the color and the textures are quite different.
Yeah.
But of course, I will allow you to taste each one of them and tell us how we did.
Okay, let me start with this
The
one.
store-bought, yeah?
The store-bought.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And now try the one we made from scratch.
Wow, that was sweeter.
Perfect. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. I have managed to convince Milkah that you can actually be able to turn a store-bought sauce into a homemade sauce, and you may actually be able to come up with a much better variety than the one that you may actually find on the shelf. Now I'm also going to allow you to taste that. Okay. And while you do so, I'm just going to finish off the plating of this very simple dish by slicing a lemon wedge. Be sure to always discard the seeds before placing on your plate. And this I'm just going to mount on the side like that. So the beautiful thing about the lemon, brings a nice refreshing flavor to your meatballs all together. And of course, just to finish off the dish, a nice simple garnish with some fresh coriander leaves. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last and final part of the show. We have, of course, managed to show you how to make your very own meatballs simply done in the oven. The total cooking time was about 15 minutes. We cooked them at about 180 degrees and they're nicely fully cooked. How's the flavor? How is it compared to the last meatball we did?
With this one, I can taste the, what were they called? The seeds?
Which seeds?
The ones.
Oh,
the one I tasted.
Oh, the olives.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And anything else particularly different, maybe when it comes to the flavor? Do you think this is something you'd serve to your kid at home?
Yeah, definitely.
It's nice and easy, huh?
Nice and easy.
Perfect. Yeah. That, of course, now brings us to yet another beautiful end of a beautiful day. I will, of course, thank you guys at home once again for tuning in this far and showing your support. Do remember, you can also make a chance or get the chance to be right on this same spot as Milkah has. As Milkah had mentioned before, maybe you can remind them once more on how they can be able to be part of the show.
Yeah, just as simple as ABC, just SMS the number that will be shown on your screen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, comment, like, and you'll be here, just like me.
And also we need to remind them, Milkah, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, remember you should do so. You definitely want to be up to date with many of the recipes that we work on. And remember, these recipes come in every single week. Remember, you can also air your views, comments, suggestions, or any queries on our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya as well. But for now, I will bid you farewell, wishing you a lovely evening, God's blessings, and see you soon.